In the year 2387, humanity had reached the peak of its technological advancements, yet it remained a small player in the vast expanse of the galaxy. The known universe teemed with life forms and civilizations, but Earth had always remained untouched by the more powerful races. Many had considered it insignificant, a quiet blue world nestled in a corner of the galaxy with no real importance in the grand scheme of things. That was until the arrival of the Zinthar Dominion. The Zinthar were a ruthless and ancient species known for their ruthless conquests. Their warships were vast, and their weapons of war more advanced than anything humanity had ever seen. They had already decimated several worlds in their campaign of expansion, and now they had set their sights on Earth. Its wealth of natural resources, its thriving cities, its people all lay in their path. The first sign of the coming destruction came as an unexplainable shift in the stars was detected by Earth's top astronomers. It was subtle at first, a small anomaly in the light patterns that would have gone unnoticed by most, but to the few who studied the deep reaches of space, it was enough to send them scrambling in confusion and dread. Within hours, the government had mobilized every resource to investigate, but it was too late. The skies above Earth darkened as the Zinthar fleet dropped from the warp into real space, their ships so massive they blotted out entire constellations, each one carrying enough firepower to wipe out an entire planet. In an instant, Earth's defense systems were barely enough to make a dent in the approaching force. In the span of days, the unthinkable happened. Entire cities fell without warning. The first to go was New York, reduced to rubble in a single bombardment. The next was London, then Tokyo, followed by every major city around the globe. It was as if the world had been struck by an unstoppable force. Every resistance was crushed, as if it had never existed. Humans tried to fight back, of course, desperate, but their weapons were no match for the Zinthar energy shields or their superior technology. When the Global Defense Network sent its first volley of missiles at the invaders, they simply phased through them without leaving a trace of damage. Earth's finest military commanders gave their best orders only to have them fall apart under the overwhelming strength of the enemy. Even the most powerful weapon humanity had created, the Aurora Shield, a defense system designed to protect against extraterrestrial threats, failed to hold the Zinthar at bay. The invaders had studied Earth's technology for years and had developed countermeasures long before their arrival. The world's leaders gathered in a final attempt to strategize, but there was no hope left. Their cities had fallen, their military was shattered, and their governments were little more than a collection of survivors, huddled together in scattered bunkers waiting for their inevitable end. Yet as the Zinthar forces swept through Earth's continents, one by one something unexpected began to happen. The humans who had been driven underground found themselves uniting in ways they had never imagined before. Isolated groups of civilians, refugees, and military personnel began organizing themselves into makeshift resistance forces. They didn't know how to win, but they knew they couldn't let Earth fall without a fight. And so it began, the fight for humanity's survival. The odds were beyond anything they had ever faced, but one thing became clear to everyone who was watching: no matter how outmatched they were, humans would not go quietly into the night. They would fight to the last breath if necessary. The Zinthar had underestimated them. In the aftermath of the initial assault, humanity's response was chaotic at best, with entire cities obliterated and governments collapsing into disarray. The survivors found themselves scattered in pockets of resistance. But even in the midst of devastation, something remarkable began to take shape. It was in the shadows that the true strength of humanity emerged. Elias Carter was one of the few who had been ready for this moment, a former soldier who had spent years in the military training for what seemed like impossible odds. When the first Zinthar ships arrived, he knew it was only a matter of time before they would make their way to Earth's defenses. When the invaders made their move, he was in the underground command center of a secret military bunker just outside Denver, watching as the world outside crumbled to dust. For days, the survivors in the bunker waited in silence, watching as the global communications network collapsed, one broadcast after another falling into static. No one could answer why the Zinthar had targeted Earth, why the Earth governments had failed to prevent it. No one had any answers, but they all shared one thing in common: they had survived the first wave, and now they had to find a way to fight back. As the days stretched into weeks, the underground bunkers became havens of organized chaos. Elias and the others began training civilians in the art of guerrilla warfare, teaching them to use whatever they could find to fight back against the invaders. He knew that facing the Zinthar head-on with conventional weapons would be suicide. They were outgunned, outmatched, and outclassed in every way. But Elias understood the power of human ingenuity and adaptability. In the tight, dimly lit corridors of the bunkers, old military equipment was dusted off and repurposed, while survivors scoured abandoned warehouses for anything useful. It was in this period of desperation that something began to change about the humans themselves. Their spirit was unyielding, their resolve hardening like steel beneath the weight of their circumstances. Elias did not focus on the hopelessness of their situation. He focused on what made humans different from every other species he had studied over the years: the strength of the human will, their unbreakable drive to survive and protect their own. It was this quality he believed would be their weapon against the Zinthar. Each small victory fueled their resolve. When a group of survivors took down a Zinthar scouting patrol, using only improvised weapons, it sent a ripple through the ranks of the resistance. Humans were not powerless. After all, they still had the will to fight, and they would not let their world fall without extracting a heavy price. One by one, these pockets of resistance began to form across the globe as survivors from every corner of the world reached out to others through hacked communication networks and secure channels. The Zinthar had believed Earth's isolation would make their conquest easier, but they had failed to account for the scattered humanity's stubborn resilience. It wasn't long before Elias became a symbol of this resistance, not just a leader but a beacon of hope to the others. He didn't just organize them, he inspired them. He shared with them the belief that humanity was worth fighting for, that Earth wasn't just another world to conquer, but a place worth saving. The Zinthar had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated the power of humans. When faced with extinction, they had underestimated what humans could do when they had nothing left to lose. Elias knew that they weren't ready to defeat the Zinthar yet, but he believed in them. He believed in the strength of their spirit, and most importantly, he knew that no matter how overwhelming the enemy was, no matter how powerful their technology, the humans of Earth would fight with everything they had until the very last breath. In the early days of the resistance, Elias and his team had focused on guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run raids that left the Zinthar guessing where the next attack would come from. But as their enemies adapted and countered their movements, Elias knew they couldn't keep up the fight with only makeshift weapons and strategies. Eventually, they would need something more, something that could change the course of the war. And it was in that desperation that he turned to an old military legend, a forgotten weapon that had been sealed away beneath Earth's surface long before the Zinthar ever set their sights on the planet. The weapon had been part of an ancient project, one that had been started during humanity's earliest days of space exploration. When humans had first ventured beyond the solar system, they had discovered a strange energy source buried deep beneath the planet's crust, an energy so powerful that it could change the very fabric of reality itself. It had taken generations of scientists and engineers to unlock its potential, and when they did, they found something beyond their comprehension. The weapon was a source of near-limitless energy capable of disrupting the advanced technology of any alien invader. But it had been sealed away, hidden deep underground, when Earth's governments realized the true potential of the power and feared what might happen if it ever fell into the wrong hands. But now, with Earth on the brink of annihilation, Elias knew there was no other choice but to seek it out and use it as the key to their survival. The path to the weapon was anything but simple. The underground facility was well hidden and surrounded by layers of security that had been set in place to keep anyone from accessing it, and for good reason. The knowledge of how to unlock its power had been lost to time, and most of the information about the project had been erased from all records when it was deemed too dangerous to pursue. Elias and his team spent weeks scouring old military archives and deciphering forgotten blueprints before they finally uncovered the location of the facility, hidden deep in the Rocky Mountains in a place where no one would ever have thought to look. The trek to the facility was treacherous. The mountains had been unstable for decades, and the ground was littered with the remnants of past battles. It took all their resources and ingenuity just to make it to the entrance, a small cave carved into the rock face that led them down into the depths of the earth. Inside the cavernous halls of the facility, the air was thick with dust and silence. It was as if the place had been abandoned for centuries, yet the faint hum of energy could still be felt through the walls. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the facility, Ilias could sense the weight of what they were about to unleash. They were standing at the precipice of something far greater than they could comprehend. But he had no choice. He had to trust in the weapon to give them the edge they needed to push back the Zinthar and save what remained of their world. At the core of the facility, they found it a massive chamber surrounded by glowing walls of ancient alien metal. At the center stood a towering device, humming with power. The weapon was both beautiful and terrifying. Its design, far beyond anything humanity had ever seen, yet somehow familiar. It was as if the relic was waiting for them. Ilias knew that this was their last hope. It was the spark they needed to ignite the final battle against the Zinthar. And with a deep breath, he made the decision to activate the weapon, not knowing what would happen next, but knowing it was the only chance they had left. The moment Ilias activated the weapon, the ground beneath them trembled, as if the very earth itself was awakening from a long slumber. The massive chamber filled with a low hum that gradually grew louder, vibrating through their bodies like an electric current. The walls flickered with strange symbols and patterns of light that seemed to pulse with life. The weapon had begun to stir. Ilias stepped back, unsure of what to expect. The hum grew deafening now, a constant buzz in the air, and the temperature in the chamber spiked. The resistance fighters looked at each other in confusion, some of them nervous. But Ilias stood firm, trusting in the device. He could feel the energy around them, almost alive. It was as if something within the weapon had been waiting for them for centuries. Suddenly, without warning, a blinding flash of light erupted from the core of the machine, blinding everyone for a moment. When their vision cleared, they found themselves staring at the impossible. The energy had surged through their bodies like a torrent of raw power, their senses heightened to levels they had never imagined. They could hear the slightest rustle of a leaf outside the chamber, and see the faintest movement in the shadows. Their muscles had grown stronger, their reflexes faster, and their minds sharper. It was as though the weapon had unlocked something deep within them, a latent potential that humans had never known they possessed. Ilias staggered slightly, feeling the surge of power course through him. He could sense his own heartbeat louder than ever. His body felt lighter yet stronger. It was as if he had become something more than human. And when he looked around, he saw that his team had experienced the same transformation, their eyes wide with shock as they tested their new abilities. One of the resistance fighters, Kale, lifted a heavy crate effortlessly with a single hand, his face a mixture of amazement and disbelief. He hadn't been this strong in his entire life. Another fighter, Mara, felt the air around her shift as her mind raced with calculations. She could see everything so clearly now, as though her mind was running at speeds far beyond what she had ever known. The weapon had done something to them. It had changed them. And the change was not just physical. It was something deeper, an awakening of something ancient within humanity, as if the potential for greatness had always been there, lying dormant, just waiting to be unleashed. Ilias understood then that the weapon wasn't just a tool of war. It was a catalyst for human evolution, a force that had awakened the true power within them. The Zinthar had underestimated humanity, thinking them weak and fragile. But now humanity had evolved in ways that no one could have anticipated. But with this newfound power came a new sense of responsibility. Ilias felt the weight of it pressing down on him. He was no longer just leading a ragtag group of survivors. He was leading an entirely new kind of force, a species that had been transformed by the very weapon they had activated. He turned to his team, their faces filled with determination and awe. They were ready. They had become something new, and this new humanity would stand against the Zinthar with a strength they had never known before. It was time to make the Zinthar realize the cost of underestimating Earth's people, to show them that humanity's fight for survival was no longer a fight of desperation. It was a fight of power, evolution, and determination, and they were ready to make their move. The newly empowered humans were eager to make their mark. Their newfound abilities were intoxicating, and their minds burned with the promise of victory, Ilias knew that they could not waste any time. The Zinthal fleet was still advancing, and while they had gained an advantage, their enemy was vast and relentless. The first target was a Zinthal supply base, just outside the remnants of what had once been Berlin. The Zinthal had set up a secure facility to gather resources and maintain their hold on the region. Ilias and his team planned to hit them hard and fast. The Resistance's new strength gave them the confidence they needed, but it was still dangerous. As they approached the base in the dead of night, the team moved through the shadows, their movements almost silent, each one of them adjusting to their heightened senses. Mara, the tech expert, moved with purpose, her eyes darting around, scanning every piece of equipment and communication frequency. She hacked into the Zinthos surveillance systems with ease, as if it was second nature. Kale and the others used their enhanced strength to lift obstacles and clear paths faster than any normal human could ever hope to. Ilias stood at the head of the group, his mind racing with the tactical possibilities. The Zinthal would never see them coming. The strike was meant to be quick, a surgical operation to disrupt their operations and show them that humans could fight back. But what they didn't know was that the strike would be just the beginning of something far larger. The plan was simple: get in, disable the power generators, and disrupt their communications network, then leave before the Zinthal could retaliate. But as they infiltrated the facility, they discovered something far worse than they had anticipated. Hidden within the base was a Zinthal command center and a massive energy weapon capable of annihilating entire cities. Ilias could feel the weight of it. His breath quickened. This was no ordinary supply base. This was a key point in their invasion, and if the Zinthal were allowed to complete the weapon, it would shift the tide of the war in their favor. Ilias didn't hesitate. His mind raced with calculations as he ordered his team to split up and destroy the weapon, while the rest of them would cover the rest of the base. As the energy weapon hummed to life, they could feel its power through the ground beneath them, a low vibration that made the air thick with tension. Kale and Mara led the charge toward the weapon's core, their enhanced speed allowing them to race through the corridors like phantoms. The Zinthal were caught off guard, but their numbers quickly rallied, and the fight became fierce. Gunfire echoed through the hallways as the humans fought tooth and nail to gain control of the facility. Meanwhile, Ilias led the remaining resistance fighters to disable the power generators. Explosions rang out as they planted charges at key locations. The Zinthal tried to counterattack, but they were slow and clumsy compared to the humans, now powered by the starborn energy. Their reflexes were lightning fast, and their strength was unmatched. Mara reached the energy weapon's core just as it began to power up its deadly charge. She and Kale worked in tandem, their hands moving with precision as they triggered the shutdown sequence in the weapon's system. Sparks flew as the weapon began to flicker and died. It was too late for the Zinthal to stop them. The weapon had been neutralized, and their supply base was falling apart around them. As the resistance fighters made their escape, Ilias could feel the rush of victory. Their first true strike against the Zinthal was a success. They had taken down one of the most critical pieces of the alien war machine, and with it they had proven that humanity could not only survive, but could actively resist. The Zinthal would not be able to ignore them anymore. Earth had given them a taste of what was to come, and now the real battle was just beginning. The victory at the Zinthal supply base had sent shockwaves through the alien invaders. The once certain dominance of the Zinthal over Earth had been shaken by a force they hadn't anticipated. Humanity had struck with ferocity and precision, proving they were not helpless before the might of the invaders. Ilias and his team had become symbols of hope, not just for the resistance, but for all of Earth's survivors. The Zinthal were furious. In their anger, they unleashed a devastating counterattack. Their warships darkened the skies as they arrived in orbit above the shattered cities of Earth. They were not content to simply retaliate against the human resistance. They intended to crush any lingering hope among the people of Earth, once and for all. With Earth's communication network still struggling to recover, Ilias had no way of knowing how far the Zinthal would go. But he knew they would not let the strike on the supply base go unpunished, and so he prepared his team for the next phase of their war. Their victory was temporary. The Zinthal were far more advanced and more brutal than any enemy they had faced before. but humanity had proven they could fight back. The resistance had grown bolder since their first successful strike. More pockets of survivors had emerged from hiding and rallied to their cause, but they were scattered and uncoordinated. Ilias knew that in order to face the full might of the Zinthar, they would need to unite the scattered forces into a single unified army, a force that could stand against the invaders with everything they had. In the darkened remnants of the world's major cities, a new kind of leadership began to emerge. Commanders like Ilias, who had once fought alone, now found themselves leading entire battalions of rebels. They weren't just soldiers anymore, they were warriors born from the ashes of their cities and homes. The next move was a coordinated assault on a Zinthar command ship, a massive vessel that had been anchored above what was left of Paris. It was here that the invaders had been coordinating their global strategy, and where their most powerful commanders were located. Ilias and his team were selected to lead the operation, their enhanced abilities giving them the edge they needed to infiltrate and strike at the heart of the Zinthar war effort. The mission was perilous, but Ilias had no choice but to push forward. Every moment wasted meant more cities destroyed, more lives lost. They could not afford to wait for the perfect opportunity. They had to act now, before the Zinthar could bring their full might to bear against the last remnants of humanity. The team descended toward Paris under the cover of darkness, moving with the speed and precision only their enhanced senses could afford them. They crossed the ruined streets and into the subterranean tunnels below the city, where the Zinthar had established a landing zone for their ships. As they approached the command ship, Ilias's mind raced through the possible outcomes. He had a plan, but he knew that no plan survived contact with the enemy. And this was no ordinary enemy. The Zinthar had already begun to react to their presence. They were waiting for them. The resistance fought their way through the defenses with ruthless efficiency, but every step forward seemed to cost them more casualties. They couldn't afford to lose anyone, but it was becoming clear that the Zinthar were not going to back down easily. Ilias's team reached the core of the Zinthar command ship, but just as they prepared to strike the heart of the ship's systems, a massive shockwave ripped through the ground, throwing them off balance. The Zinthar had anticipated their attack, and now they were retaliating in full force. The resistance was forced to adapt on the fly as the Zinthar launched wave after wave of countermeasures. Their weapons were too powerful, their ships too numerous. Ilias knew they were running out of time. They had to finish what they started before the full weight of the Zinthar response came crashing down on them. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for the future of their species. The explosion reverberated through the Zinthar command ship. As Ilias and his team were thrown to the ground, the air thick with smoke and debris, their bodies were aching, but they rose to their feet, knowing that they had only moments before the Zinthar unleashed their full retaliation. The attack had worked, but it had come at a cost. The Zinthar were far from defeated, and they had only just begun to show their true power. Ilias looked around at his team. Kale was struggling to maintain his balance. Mara's eyes were wide with the strain of their current situation, but her mind was already racing through the possibilities of their escape. The rest of the resistance fighters were in similar states of exhaustion, but their resolve was unwavering. They had made it this far, and they would not stop now. The Zinthar had underestimated humanity's resilience. They had thought that after their initial strikes against Earth, humanity would be easy to crush. But they were wrong. They had awakened something within the people of Earth, something fierce and untamable. And now the Zinthar would face the consequences of their arrogance. Inside the command ship, Ilias could hear the Zinthar troops regrouping, their voices alien and harsh as they scrambled to respond to the breach the team had caused. It was clear that their plan had disrupted the Zinthar's operations. But it wasn't enough. They needed to do more. They needed to deal a decisive blow to the invaders. Once and for all, Ilias turned to Mara, who was already tapping into the ship's systems, her enhanced intellect, allowing her to bypass security protocols with ease. She had found something more than they had expected buried deep within the ship's core. It was another weapon far more powerful than anything they had faced before, a weapon capable of destroying entire cities in an instant. The weapon was hidden within the ship's core, its energy signature, unlike anything they had ever seen. Mara's eyes gleamed with both excitement and dread. She understood the implications of what they had found. This weapon, if activated, could shift the balance of the war in their favor. But it also had the potential to wipe out everything around them. It was a double-edged sword. Ilias didn't hesitate. The mission had always been about taking the fight to the heart of the Zinthar. The weapon could change everything, but it was risky. They had no idea how to control it, and if they failed, the entire resistance could be wiped out in a single blast. But they had no choice. They had to take the gamble. If they didn't, the Zinthar would continue their march across the planet, and humanity would be doomed. Ilias ordered the team to move forward. The energy core was heavily guarded, but the Zinthar were distracted now, scrambling to contain the chaos caused by the Resistance's earlier strike. Mara led the way, her fingers dancing across the ship's controls as she unlocked the path to the weapon's core. The deeper they went, the more intense the Zinthar's presence became. The corridors filled with alien soldiers rushing to stop them. But they were no match for the enhanced humans, now their speed and strength overwhelming the invaders before they could react. As they reached the core, Ilias could feel the power radiating from it. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before, an energy so pure and concentrated that it sent waves of electricity through the air. They had to act quickly. Mara set to work manipulating the ship's systems to harness the weapon's energy. Ilias could feel the tension rising. Every second felt like an eternity. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. But then, just as it seemed they would succeed, the ship began to shudder violently. The Zinthar had figured out what they were doing and launched a final assault to stop them. The countdown to the weapon's activation began. Ilias knew this was their last chance. They had to push through, or they would never get another shot. The countdown echoed in Ilias's mind, the hum of the Zinthar ship growing louder with every passing second. The air was thick with tension as his team fought desperately to maintain their position. The Zinthar had launched their final assault, trying to reclaim control of the ship and prevent the weapon from being activated. But Ilias and his team were determined. They had come too far to fail now. Mara worked furiously, her fingers flying across the ship's control panel as she attempted to override the security measures the Zinthar had put in place. But every second felt like an eternity, the countdown ticking down relentlessly while the ship shook under the assault from the alien forces. Kale and the others stood guard around her, holding off wave after wave of Zinthar soldiers, their enhanced strength and reflexes allowing them to fight with a ferocity that the invaders couldn't match. But the pressure was mounting with every passing moment. They could hear the Zinthar forces closing in, their numbers growing as they scrambled to retake control of the ship. Ilias could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Their mission had never been about just survival. It was about giving humanity a chance to rise up against the Zinthar and take back their world. But now, as the countdown continued to tick down, he began to wonder if they had gone too far. Had they pushed humanity to the brink of total annihilation? Mara's voice cut through the chaos, her eyes wide with urgency as she spoke. I can't override the core's security. We need to manually engage the final sequence, or this whole thing is going to detonate in less than a minute. Her hands were shaking with the effort, but she remained focused. Ilias didn't hesitate. He turned to Kale and the others. We need to buy Mara enough time to finish it, he ordered as they fought back against the Zinthar soldiers. With all the strength they had, they could feel the pressure mounting, their hearts pounding as they held their ground, the sound of blaster fire and screams filling the air as the Zinthar attempted to overwhelm them. Mara's eyes flicked from the countdown to the control panel and back again. She was running out of time. The Zinthar were getting closer and closer, and every passing second felt like a small eternity. They couldn't afford to fail. The weapon was their last hope, but the cost of using it was unimaginable. Ilias's mind raced. He could feel the power of the energy core thrumming beneath the ship's surface. It was a force of nature itself, and if they activated it, they knew it would change the course of the war forever. But they also knew that it was a weapon that could erase everything in its path. It was a gamble, a terrifying gamble, that they had no choice but to take. Just as the Zinthar forces seemed ready to overwhelm them, Mara's voice rang out. I've done it. The core's been unlocked, she said. But before Ilias could react, the entire ship lurched violently as an explosion rang out from the Zinthar's final assault. The blast sent them all sprawling to the ground, the air filled with smoke and debris. Elias fought to stay conscious, his vision blurry, but through the chaos he saw Mara's hand reach for the control panel one last time, and with a desperate breath she hit the final button. The core exploded with light, an immense shockwave pulsing outward from the heart of the ship. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart, and for a moment everything went white. Then the ship began to break apart, its systems collapsing, as the weapon activated, sending a devastating blast of energy rippling through the surrounding Zinthar fleet. The shockwave reached out like a tidal wave, tearing through the alien ships, ripping them apart in an instant. But Elias knew it wasn't over yet. The Zinthar had been dealt a heavy blow, but the war was far from finished. Humanity had only just begun to fight back, and the true reckoning was yet to come. The explosion from the weapon was unlike anything Elias had ever experienced. A blinding light filled the sky, and the ship trembled, as if the universe itself was reacting to the unleashed power. When the light finally faded, and the ringing in his ears subsided, the first thing Elias noticed was the silence. The constant hum of the Zinthar ship was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that stretched across the broken battlefield. He pushed himself to his feet, still disoriented from the shockwave. The ground beneath him was scorched and cracked. The sky above had been torn open by the weapon's energy, rippling outward in every direction, and in the distance, the once mighty Zinthar fleet was scattered in ruined fragments of ships drifting aimlessly in the void. But victory didn't feel like victory, not yet, not in the way he had imagined it. The power of the weapon had obliterated the Zinthar forces in their immediate vicinity. But Elias knew that this was only a temporary setback for the invaders. They were resilient and would regroup soon enough if they were given the chance. As the dust settled, Mara and Kel moved to his side, their faces grim but determined. "We did it," Mara said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "But it won't be enough to stop them all." Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the wreckage of the Zinthar ships. The enemy had been caught off guard, but their fleet was vast, and they had resources far beyond what humanity could ever hope to muster. They would rebuild and return, unless they struck the Zinthar at their core. "We've made a dent," Elias said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of their situation. "But this is just the beginning. We need to take the fight to their homeworld before they can recover and rebuild." Kale clenched his fists. "We can't let them rebuild. We need to finish it now." His voice was full of fury, the same anger that had driven them to this point. But Elias knew that the cost of such a bold move was immeasurable. They would be stepping into the heart of the Zinthar Empire, a place they had no idea how to navigate, much less destroy. But the decision had already been made. Humanity had already crossed the point of no return. They couldn't go back now. The Zinthar had invaded Earth, and they had taken too much from them. Too many lives, too many cities, destroyed, too many loved ones lost. There was no option left but to fight for the survival of the species. "We're not going to let them win," Elias said with conviction. "We have the power now. We have to finish it and take the war to their homeworld." The team didn't hesitate. They had seen the horrors of the Zinthar occupation firsthand, and now they were ready to strike back with everything they had, even if it meant risking everything. Elias turned to Mara, who was already analyzing the Zinthar technology with her sharp mind. "We need a way to get to their homeworld, and we need it fast," he said. Mara nodded. "I can work on that. We have some of their ship technology. Now we just need to reverse engineer enough to make it work." As they worked together, Elias couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. Humanity was counting on them. They couldn't afford to fail, not now, not when they had the chance to take the fight to the heart of the Zinthar Empire. The war wasn't over yet, but they had a chance, a real chance, to end it on their terms. And Elias knew that with every ounce of strength and resolve they had, they would see it through to the end. They had already survived the worst. The rest would be nothing more than a final stand for the future of humanity. The ship was quiet as Elias and his team prepared for their final journey. The hum of the Zinthar technology that had been repurposed for their mission was the only sound filling the space. The plan had been set in motion, and there was no turning back now. Mara had worked tirelessly to modify the Zinthar ship, and within hours they had a functional craft that could travel across the vast distances to the heart of the Zinthar Empire. It wasn't much, But it was all they had, and in that moment, it was enough. The team was ready to make their final stand against the invaders. Ilias stood at the helm of the ship, his hands steady, as he prepared to navigate through the unknown depths of enemy space. The map they had of the Zinthar homeworld was incomplete and fragmented, but it would have to do. It was a dangerous mission, and the odds were stacked against them, but they were driven by a singular purpose: humanity's survival. The journey was long and perilous. The team remained on high alert. Every moment spent in Zinthar-controlled space was a gamble, and the further they traveled, the more tense the atmosphere became. The craft was small enough to remain undetected by the larger ships in the Zinthar fleet, but the risks were high. Every move had to be calculated and precise. As they neared the Zinthar homeworld, the signs of their civilization became apparent. The sheer scale of their empire was breathtaking. Vast cities stretched across the surface of their planet, towering structures of alien design that seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The air was thick with the presence of the enemy. Ilias could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the final chapter in the war for Earth's future. The Zinthar had come to their homeworld to conquer and enslave, but now humanity had come to their doorstep with the power to end it all. "We're almost there," Mara said, her voice calm, but laced with tension. "We've been spotted, but we can't turn back now." Ilias nodded. The time for hesitation had passed. Now was the time for action. "We do this together. We take them down once and for all." The team prepared for the worst. The Zinthar fleet was vast, and their forces were numerous. But they were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting for everything. The resistance had fought for the lives of every human left on Earth. The plan was simple: infiltrate the central command center of the Zinthar homeworld, disable their power grid, and activate the self-destruct sequence that would send a shockwave of destruction through their entire empire. It was a desperate measure, but one that offered the only real chance of victory. As they descended toward the surface of the planet, the ship was hit by blasts from the Zinthar defenses. The impact shook the craft, but they held their course. The team fought through the turbulence as they neared their target, the central command center of the Zinthar homeworld. When they landed, the final battle began. With every step they took, the Zinthar forces seemed to multiply, their numbers overwhelming, but not their resolve. Ilias and his team fought through wave after wave of enemies, their strength and speed matched only by their determination to see the mission through. Mara hacked into the mainframe of the central command center with precision, disabling the defense systems and activating the countdown that would trigger the destruction of the Zinthar infrastructure. As the final seconds ticked down, Ilias looked around at his team. They were battered and bruised, but they were unyielding. They had come to end this war once and for all. The mission had been a success. The Zinthar empire would fall and humanity would rise from the ashes. With one last look at the battlefield, Ilias's voice rang out, "This is for Earth." And as the countdown reached 0, the planet shook, and the Zinthar homeworld erupted in a burst of blinding light, their empire collapsing under the weight of humanity's wrath.